Welcome to the TechLife podcast. In this episode, I got a chance to catch up with an old friend, Harry Lowton. From his days back at PowerON right through to now working at Microsoft across the United States. We caught up on what it's like to have a new baby, as well as how he himself creates content for learning and sharing your knowledge on YouTube. I hope you enjoy, and don't forget to subscribe, turn on your notifications for upcoming episodes, and drop a like or comment. Harry, absolutely brilliant to get some time with you. It has been far too long. How are you doing?
Steve, I'm doing great. It has been a long time, and we are across the world right now. We used to be able to just sit in the same office, say hello, but I guess now I'm in the US and you UK, we have to do it by Teams.
Absolutely. So that is a very interesting bit. And before we start to explain what that relationship was, because obviously I know you and I've known you for quite some time, do you want to just give a quick introduction of who you are, where you're at, and what you're doing these days?
Absolutely. So I'm Harry Lowton. I work as an account technology strategist for Microsoft. So I help some awesome customers out here in California, really seeing how they can digitally transform, innovate, and use Microsoft products to the best they can. So that's what I do day in, day out. I speak and love talking about all sorts of Microsoft technologies.
So that's interesting. So Technical Account Strategist, was that?
Strategist, yeah.
Strategist at Microsoft. So I know
Correct.
you from the days when you used to work alongside us at PowerON in our very early days across here in the UK, and you're now across in, did you say California?
Yep, I now live just outside of LA in Orange County.
Living the life in the sun. So,
as you can tell from
with a nice black background behind you. Where's the palm trees?
There is one outside. I got one right outside the front door. I'm living the true American life right now.
Very nice. So back when you was across here with us, you were very much heavily involved in that EUC space with Config Manager, just as Intune was starting to come through. What type of techs are you now dealing with?
So I still dabble with that. It's still a love, after years of doing that with yourself, Steve, it's hard to remove that from a joy that I do. So it's part of it, but in my role, I go across all of the Microsoft cloud. So I talk about Azure, Dynamics, Power Plat. I talk about the end user compute space. So there are, I guess the saying, the T-shape, there's pieces that I go deep still into, like end user computing. I haven't lost that. But then, I have to go very wide on a whole range of tech. So I think the background of, PowerON being, starting my world as an IT support engineer and doing all of that, I have a pretty wide spectrum at this point of what I can talk about, which helps in my day job because, as I say, one day we might be talking to, CIOs, CTOs, CISOs. It might be head of data, goes all across the board. So definitely a helpful background to slot in where I need to.
That's really interesting then. So you've got that complete overarching sort of vision now where different things can slot in together, how bringing in something like Teams with that whole productivity element has an impact on the desktop side in terms of how do we get deployments and configuration done to give you a good user experience across it, right through to the reverse side then of how you start to secure them assets from the identity aspect and them different interjoined and intertwined rather than just a very small narrow focus of I can do this.
Absolutely. Yeah, I try and look at it holistically at what is the business trying to do and how do all the different technologies integrate and interop to make, whatever value we're trying to do with that organization. And of course, there's a whole load of people that I work with to make that happen. And, we have specialists across all those different domains. But, I guess if you try and think of it like an architecture lens, that's kind of how I try and think about it. So,
Right, so you're not just a lone wolf going and singing the Kool-Aid.
No.
Actually got that team where you can draw the expertise as you need to help really explode that vision side.
yeah.
So if you've got such that wide-ranging bits, and obviously there is such a huge magnitude of products and stuff within the Microsoft stack, have you got a good example of either a recent customer you've been talking to, or just generally what you've been hearing within the news of something that might be really pertinent in people's minds at the minute in terms of either a starting point of where they've been thinking that kind of led to somewhere completely different?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my conversations at this point is data. How do we use data to make some form of actionable decision as a business, right? So a lot of our conversations might start, even if they started in the business applications world, like, okay, we need this application, pull this data. Really a lot of my conversations then come outside of that. I was like, well, hang on, there's a much bigger conversation here of, well, that data might be interesting, but there's all this other operational data and everything else that the rest of the business is using. Let's work with our business teams and our data teams to tie together what we're trying to achieve and then bring that out, extrapolate it, whether it's Power BI dashboards, whatever it might be, whether it's onto their own web apps. Like a lot of my life is really at the moment trying to think about, okay, we have all these different silos across the business, and I have different silos of teams to some degree that I have to work with. How do I think about what's the connecting tissue for all of these to actually make sense? And a lot of businesses are trying to think about that right now. Like, how do they work out what worked in, what we've been doing for the last few years? What's working moving forward? I mean, you can see products like Microsoft with Viva. How do we start bringing all the connected tissue of what we're doing with our meetings, how we're working, time in, time sending meetings out, and bring that back to the managers and say, this is the things that you may not be able to see from your day-to-day job, right? And the similar world in the business that I'm trying to think about is, how do I really prove that we can make actionable decisions based on the data that you own? So that's what I spend a lot of time, which is very different to what I did with you. Is we didn't think data as much, but it's definitely an interesting space.
It is definitely an interesting space because, like I say, while I always used to say that whole data is king, you shouldn't just make a decision without some understanding of the actual metrics and stuff behind it. But we were always then, if we were looking at the data, just focused on a very small subset. So it's like, how many Windows 7 devices need to go to Windows 10? How much RAM have they got in it so we know whether they can make the upgrade? Or looking across on the actual Azure side as we move data centers, it was mainly about that capacity and very fixed data sets, which was still valuable, because you still need to understand that and explode it. And we've done so much bits and pieces now with Power BI specifically to help visualize that information for consumption. And I think this is where I'm basically going with this bit, is that consumption of the data. But as you just mentioned, that whole idea of that interconnected tissue underneath the business of all the different systems, where flowing it into a pool of data and being able to get them relationships and the, I don't want to use the word over much, but that interconnectedness of the data, so you can say, like, actually that data point has a direct impact over here, is becoming a lot more pertinent to understanding the wider business impact of how things generally work within an organisation. Now,
Absolutely.
It's interesting because you obviously can very well articulate what you're on about, and you can pretty much tell by the lovely black background behind you and stuff that this isn't your first sort of rodeo in front of the camera. And I know we've been discussing a little bit off camera and stuff around things like this. You do a lot of that whole presenting or recording of training and stuff, quite a bit within your spare time and stuff. How do you find that, and why do you do that?
Yeah, it's a good question, Steve. I think, and I've talked with my managers and stuff on this, and really it goes back to kind of how I started in IT. I mean, I didn't go to university or anything like that. I straight out of school, I started in a tech IT job and went from there. And really, it comes to my whole career was built based on community and seeing what others were putting out there and learning from. And as the years went on, I've tried all sorts of mediums. I did blogging. I've presented in a lot of actual in-person conferences, especially when I was in the UK. And then each time I did that, I thought, that's great. That's something I can enjoy. But video, for some reason, just always was calling to me. But I never really had a perfect time in my life where it made sense. You know, when I was with you, I was always consulting, and I was out on the road all the time. I never had a place that I found comfortable to make recordings in. And then, I was in the office all the time for my first job out here in the US. And then finally, I guess everything moved in where the pandemic happened. I was at Microsoft, and it was time where I was like, all right, I get just to talk about this technology day in, day out, for my actual day job. But there are other technologies and things I want to do deeper that I can't necessarily do day in, day out. So that's when I was like, all right, how do I give back to everyone else that gave to me through my career growing up? And that's when I started the channel. One day I was sitting there and I recorded. Now, if you look back at it, it's still on my channel. It was not the world's best video I've ever made, but I just said to myself, I've just got to record something and publish it. No fancy editing, no fancy technology. Now I have quite a lot of kit, but then I didn't. I just recorded it, put it up, and then said, I'm just going to do this every week and see what happens. And that's what I was doing, and that's how I started it. And it's got great from what I've seen community feedback. So I just keep going, and I've been loving it.
So that's an interesting bit on that one. There's a couple of things. So you mentioned consistency.
Yep.
And you also mentioned not overly critically analysing yourself on it. It's more important just to get it out there. In terms of that sort of approach, I mean, was there a specific mindset that you already had to do it that way, or was that just a YOLO, let's go and get it done? What was that idea behind just getting out there, and why did you think about that consistency side?
Yeah, I mean, why I wanted to get out there was that I just felt that I had spent a lot of time in this space, and I had an ability to really talk about technology, what I thought, and obviously everyone else can say what their opinions is. I thought I could talk about either fairly simple topics to complex topics in a fairly simplistic manner that I felt people could learn from. So that was kind of what I was coming from and where I felt my value was. And how I decided that just to kind of, as you say, kind of YOLO, put a video up there and go for it was that my default for these things is perfection. That's where I draw myself to when it comes to this, not everything in my life, but especially publishing things online. But it suddenly hit me that if I was to do that for the last few years that I wanted to do this, I will never publish a video. It will never happen.
Yeah.
So I had to kind of get past that mentality, and that's why I put a video on that I knew was nowhere near perfect, and I didn't want it to be perfect. Like if I had to come out thinking my first video would be absolutely perfect and everyone will love it and it will get millions of views, that would have been a ridiculous goal, and it wouldn't have happened and I would have been demoralized. Instead, I put it out with no expectations. If one person watches it and gets something from it, brilliant. If 100 people watch it, great. I didn't care about the numbers. That wasn't of interest. It was really just, let me start this, let me start building. And now, the community's grown more and more, and I've tweaked bits. I just try and get a little bit better each time I make a video. Is it the lighting is better, the microphone is better, whatever, right? It's just slowly improve my delivery style. And that's how I've been going for it. And I do think it's been improving. I took a little bit of a hiatus as I had a little one 10 months ago. So not as much time in front of the camera, but I'm trying to get back into it now, which is exciting.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting bit, because I kind of half set you up for that question because it's a similar thing for myself. And as you saw, as I was gesticulating a second ago and I smashed that from the side, which I will now just move to the side. I, again, very similar to yourself, have that strive for perfectionism all the time. And little things like that for me would have been a showstopper where I would have gone, right, that's it, let's start again from scratch and let's go back again. When in reality, that is part of life. Things go wrong and all the rest of it. But having that mindset to go, hang on a second, I could spend 6 months trying to get something out the door, constantly critiquing myself, thinking it has to be perfect, and then holding yourself back from what is the most important thing of getting a message across, and B, finding your voice, can be a big blocker for some people.
It can. You're absolutely right. And I think there's, I mean, we always see the things like imposter syndrome and all of that. But I think if you've learned something and you look back at it, if you were to publish what you just learned, and some videos that I've done, and I think this will help people, is where I may have only learnt it the week that I published the video. I found it very interesting. I read the documents, I played with it, I thought about, okay, how could I make this video? And then I publish it. I'm not an expert at it. I'm not out there consulting day in and day out on it. I made the education that people can learn from where I started from. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of people get stuck on everything that I should publish should either be a really deep expert level, or I should personally be an expert, which I don't think is the case. The knowledge sharing can be wherever you are in your journey, because someone else is going to be either looking at your journey and trying to learn from it, or coming into our industry where they won't have the knowledge that you've just gained, whether it was 10 minutes ago or whether it was years ago. So that's where and sometimes, don't get me wrong, Steve, sometimes I still struggle with it, where I'm like, can I really make a video on that? Like, this isn't what I do day in, day out. But I try and remove that and think, well, if I've learned it and I got value from it, somebody else must be able to get value from it as well. I'm not just doing this for people to think, oh, wow, look at all the views that Harry got. That isn't what I do it for. No. So hopefully that will help someone out there.
Yeah, I think it is that mindset. And I'm probably going to get so slated for this. It's that big difference between an influencer that's on something like Instagram or TikTok that is, in my opinion, just basically doing it a lot for the likes more than anything. Whereas you've got that other flip side, especially within the tech industry, where a lot of it is driven out of that whole learning aspect, wanting to share knowledge, and it is a different beast between watching a counter. And don't get me wrong, I still like to watch a counter because it does.
Oh yeah, I mean, we all want validation.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little bit of validation to say, actually, was that specific topic area of interest to people?
Right.
Was it my style? Do I need to adapt? And you learn from it rather than just going, hey, I've got 100 million likes. Not that I can never get 100 million likes. I might be lucky to get 5 likes. But you get the idea. It's not just necessarily, especially in that whole learning side of things, that you do this for the likes. It's a different type of world from the social media, for a better word.
But if it gets to that and grows that, incredible, like amazing. The effort that you put in and the learning that you've done, I can't be more impressed. Like that's great. Like if your channel picks up and grows and everything like that, wonderful news. That's just not the mindset I started with. Of just get the knowledge out there, share it. If it grows, it grows. Amazing. But
absolutely. So you mentioned a second ago that you've obviously got a small one, which was actually a bit of a surprise for me because we've not managed to catch up in ages, and this kind of gives you an indication of just how long, because I've been that busy and all the rest of it, especially with my own personal life. So you've now got a small dependent one.
Yeah.
And that in itself will tend to take time away from your personal life when you do have time to do things like videos, etc. It's kind of a semi-redundant question in some respects to say how much impact has that had on your life, because I'm going to imagine it's had loads. But in terms of that whole evolving landscape of the changes you've been through in them last few years, with moving out to the US in general, starting that whole family life, changing job roles quite significantly, how much has it, well, actually, just generally, how much has it changed you from, as I knew you as a fairly young lad with a very focus on work and all the rest of it, to how you are now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I often make the joke that I'm a recovering workaholic, but depending how that recovery is depends on the week. But I think the biggest thing that I've learned since then, and you're right, back then that was most of my focus was work and learning and improving, and I loved it. That's what I did, and I loved it, and that's what I contribute to where I am today. But yeah, now I think about it more with boundaries, right? Like I've had to put in some systems in place to make sure that I get all my work done in the time that's meant to be done. And then I have the times for family and time for what I want to do as well. Outside of that, which might be my hobbies like making YouTube videos. But really, it's kind of comes down to how do I block my time? And I think it was Atomic Habits, the book, which was you're only as good as your systems, which I like that quote because
that's twice now I've heard somebody mention about Atomic Habits.
Well, that's a good one.
In a nutshell, without me going and spoiling people who want to go and read the book, and I'm going to have to download that, especially since I've got some time off coming up. What does it kind of boil down to in a nutshell in terms of either change of approach for yourself or boundary that you've had to put in?
Yeah, I mean, I won't spoil the book per se, but I use how I think about it in the sense of like, what did I take out of it and I use in my day-to-day world? And I think, the quote that I just used, you're only as good as your systems, is one part of it. So my systems are, partly is when do I work, right? So, I normally do the morning shift with the family. I wake the baby wakes up, I do all of that. So the morning is blocked for that. Then I, between 7:30, 8 or whatever, I start work until when I finish. I have my systems in that to be successful. So, how do I manage my tasks? How do I understand what's a priority? How do I stay consistent in what I'm trying to achieve and what my goals are in that, in that role? And then same thing when I get to my personal time out of my evening family and then into when everyone's in bed. That's when I get back to, YouTube and things like that, where again, I have to have systems in place to make sure that I do it. So for example, if it's YouTube, it's very difficult, and similar probably for a podcast, it's very difficult just to turn the microphone on and make a great video with no idea of what you're going to make. If you have no idea what you're going to do, it's very challenging to start. And similar to probably to a writer, you could probably stare at the screen for quite a long time with not many words said or written down. Same thing for me. If I don't have an idea, and I don't have a system of thinking of ideas and putting them in a place that I then know, all right, here are my ideas, let me go back to them and then work out what I want to make a video on, it's going to be very challenging for me to start. Similar to the systems I have in here of I can just walk into my room, hit record pretty much, and I can get going. If I had to have a system of, all right, set up my microphone, set up my lights, I would never do it because the barrier to entry is difficult. That's now a lot of effort. So I think about it in the consistency of systems, but also the how do I put consistent systems in to actually achieve the goals that I'm trying to do. Hopefully that makes sense. That's how I think about it. There's a lot more to the book, but that's the bits that resonated to me and I extrapolated.
That's interesting because I actually hadn't thought about that, and that whole idea of that whole right, if you know you're going to be doing something regularly, making sure that you're set up to do that is something that I am actually, now that I think about it, I'm just starting to learn and probably bringing it in by not way of stealth, but without thinking about it. So it's like today, I'm lucky enough that we'd already done some bits and pieces within the office, and I'm in the office today, where we've got some of the gear and bits and pieces set up for when we're doing webinars. Yeah. Whereas at home, I've just started to slowly collect some of the bits. I've got the wireless mic and stuff. So I do have them now in place. But similarly, I've just started to use, and it's been around for ages. I've just never really found the use for it, and having them whole virtual desktops, not VMs, but in Windows, the virtual desktops to arrange the different working pieces. So I now have a virtual desktop for work, a virtual desktop for lab stuff, a virtual desktop for the podcasting bits and pieces, and so on. So I can just quickly switch context of how I'm working. And then I've got the different apps and things left open, and I can flick back without having to go through it. And like I say, that allows me now to remove a lot of the blockers and almost procrastination of myself, where I'll go, I could do that, but that's going to take me 15 minutes to go and get things ready before I can even start thinking about doing it. So that's actually something that I didn't really think about, but if that's what the terminologies and stuff it is, that atomic, was it atomic?
The book, yeah.
I want to say atomic nuggets. It wasn't atomic nuggets.
Atomic habits. I don't know. I can't remember now if they talk about the barrier to entry. Probably do, but I don't know. That's just a thing I found, and you can put that to anything, right? Like the gym, for example. If you want to get to the gym every morning, but your barrier is, it's such an effort to wake up and go find the clothes I need. By the time I've done that, I don't want to do it. That's why people, have their trainers next to their bed and their clothes next to it so they can just wake up, put it on, and out they go. Or whatever it is, right? Like each part of our life, there is some barrier and that's what I've been working on over the last year is, how do I lower the barriers to anything I'm doing? Whether that's, my job, whether that's family life, whether that's gym or whatever it is, right? There is something generally stopping me, or it's just not a priority, right? One or the other.
Yeah, you hear enough times on that whole adage of how you've got like Zuckerberg that always wears the same shirt just so they can get on. So it's less decisions to make on that side of things. I'm probably never going to be up at that level of having to get rid of that many decisions about what I wear every single day to be optimized in it. But it is a good thought process of just trying to remove, well, like we were saying, the barriers at the entry so you can just focus on getting on with stuff. Now, obviously, we've said a couple of times that you've obviously taken some of the bits that you did before, and it's kind of that evolution to getting into the videos from your previous presenting and all the rest of it, and the fact that you are now across such a wide range of the Microsoft stack. And I know, and you'll know from working with us, that I've always kind of had that whole wide view of the different intermoving components and can't necessarily go deep into them, but trying to keep and learn and understand across them. That's a lot of information to consume. So how do you both find them sources of information to consume, and do you have any special ways of trying to either get things to stick or translate that into information into how you can understand it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. One, you're right. I have a lot of tech I have to think about. And as you can imagine, there's lots of tech in Microsoft that I probably still have not even heard about. I mean, there's so much out there. But, what I try and do is, one is kind of pick the key areas. So each, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's DevOps, whether it's data, whether it's end user computing, there's always going to be the top key themes that most people or organizations are thinking about. So my day job, it's really how do I think about what is impacting organizations, and then how does that impact the people working on it, right? And what are they going to really think about and care about? So that's kind of where I start with mapping out, okay, what is either trending or what is of interest, and where's the industry going? And then depending on what it is, I will take different learning methods depending on how much I want to learn it, right? Like if it's, I just need to know conceptually what all these items are and how they are relevant to, a business, then I'll probably go to the docs pages, read what we believe it is and what we're saying it is. I generally watch a few videos on it, but what I try and do is speak about it. So, and this isn't generally done in a public forum now. This is generally a private forum where I just walk through in my own mind of how would I actually talk about this technology and what do I think about it? So you'll find me often with just decks open, just speaking through the decks. And then I have a talk track that I can talk about. And then I've taught myself it. In theory, you could then take that and then put it as a YouTube video so anyone else can learn. But when I'm at this really beginning stage, I generally do it internally. And then I cut that out and go out into speaking to customers about how I think about it. Does that make sense?
It does. I don't know why I just got this vision now of you putting your little baby to bed. Instead of reading Goldilocks and the Three Bears, you start talking about Microsoft Entra or something.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. Learn about our new products as we go, yeah.
No, just to clarify, I am joking there. I hope you are too.
Yes, that does not happen. We definitely read children's books, not Microsoft books. I do have a disconnect. So I do a lot of that. That just helps me on how I speak on technologies and topics. But a lot of it outside of that is, the usual stuff. I obviously watch videos, watch common blogs. A lot of it's just the tech community blog for Microsoft, things like that. Like what's new, what's coming out, what should I be thinking about? But outside of that, I think a lot of my learning changed from where it used to be. I used to, I want to be the best at this one technology, and I would spend all night just in that one tech, learning everything I can about it. When I was in Config Manager and Intune, so on and so forth. Now I do a lot more of kind of just-in-time learning, as I call it, in the sense of, all right, I know that these topics are coming up. I will learn it much closer to the event, and then I will take that knowledge and use it from there. So I do a lot of that. And then outside of that, when I really want to get into it, it's just labbing. I have labs to Azure, I have labs to Intune, everything else. I just build it, test it, break it down.
Yeah, labs keep on coming up over and over again. I think especially if you're in that sort of consulting or engineering type of role where you're going to be delivering these products, they are absolutely invaluable.
Oh, yeah.
Outside of that, it's good if you want to get that general understanding of how things interconnect. One of the things that I tend to say, can you remember what my rule of our test lab used to be?
Knowing you is probably just break it.
It was pretty much similar to that. It was. There was that whole thing of, I'm a big believer in that if you want to understand how something really ticks, break it first and work out how to fix it, because it gives you a much better idea of some of the interconnected bits. The rule of the test lab that everyone was sharing is, if you break it, you fix it.
No, that makes
Don't
sense.
just leave it in a broken state and expect someone else to come and pick it up. You break it, by all means, but you fix it. Now, just picking up on something there, so I know we were joking around the whole, are you reading your daughter? Sorry, I haven't actually asked that one. Is it a...
You have a 50% chance, and you've nailed it.
So I know we were joking about you reading her bedtime stories versus the Azure AD API reference and so on. But you mentioned that you do actually have some disconnects. But you also mentioned that YouTube videos and bits and pieces are a hobby and a passion. So there's that one school of thought around, especially if you work in the tech industry, you close the laptop lid at the end of the day and you do no more tech. Versus, I spoke to others, there was an episode with Ben where IT is truly his passion, so he carries that across into his hobby. So with YouTube being your passion stuff, what else do you do, or do you do, definitively non-tech outside of that?
Yeah, I mean, outside of it, it's all family right now. I mean, especially with a newborn, it makes absolute sense, right? So if I'm not thinking about tech or I'm not making videos, then I'm absolutely going to be with my family or friends, spending time with them. So that's, I mean, having a newborn, as you said at the beginning of this, is a lot of time, and I love that time. Like, I can't get that time back. I want to be there for when she's awake and when I can be with her. So that's my priority, right? So any tech or anything like that is secondary to spending time with family. And then I pick that up when everyone's in bed, asleep, so on and so forth.
Okay, so you have got that kind of, you extend your own day as such to get back into it, to do the techie side, to make sure that family piece is there on that side.
Yeah, I finish work at a good time, like, whatever it is, 5:30, 6, whatever the time is. Like, when I finish. Like, I truly disconnect as much as I can. Like, every now and again, obviously, like anything that can be broken, maybe something's happening that truly needs my attention, but I try to disconnect, and then it's on me then to re-pick it back up when the time is right, rather than, so I try not to blend that time too much, because otherwise I wouldn't spend any time with my family, and I want to. So
you mentioned finishing on a decent time on stuff on there. So obviously Microsoft is a behemoth of an entity, especially from our early days, and we were very much starting up, and there was meetings and stuff flying all over the place, but we were very customer demand driven. How's your kind of work life? What drives your work life now is what I'm trying to get to in terms of scheduling and stuff.
So how I manage my time in the day is, as you said, it's still customer driven. A lot of my time is meetings with my customers. That is the most important time for me, to be with my customers, talking about what they're trying to achieve, what they're trying to do. So that's a lot of my time is driven by that. So I have lots of those meetings scheduled through the day, but what I do try and do is schedule blocks for when I can do other things. So, I mentioned time blocking probably earlier, but I'm not as religious as some people might be on time blocking, but I do at the start of the day look at, all right, here are the meetings I've got. These are the things I absolutely have to go to, and I will be there. And then I look at the time that I have that haven't got meetings, and then I decide then on what are the most important things I've got to do in that time block. So, maybe there's no other times in the day, so I have to use that time for administration tasks, getting back to emails, responding, building decks, whatever it is. Or I put those times in for doing more deeper thinking. Maybe that's like, okay, now I want to go learn this new technology, or I need to think deep on a strategic project that we've got coming up, and I need to think about how do I represent that in some way. So at the beginning of the day, I really look at what my day's got in it, what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to achieve, and I block out the different times in my calendar. That's probably the key that I didn't used to do. And I would get to that free time, and then you'd kind of be like, well, I've got hundreds of things I could be doing. And then it's kind of a bit of a scramble, and I probably ended up doing things that weren't that useful, but they were work that was important to a degree. Like I had to get it done, but it may not have been the key priority. So now I've focused really on what do I actually have to do, and focus those in time blocks. So that's kind of how I do it.
Yeah, you see, I think I've asked this on a few of the episodes now around that piece, and I think I'm being selfish to myself on asking that question, because I still don't do it. I get so caught up in the actual customer-facing meetings, internal meetings, that when I do have that free space within my diary, I then struggle to actually think, well, I've got this space now because I'm not overrun. What do I do? And I'll go pick something, and might not necessarily be that right thing. Or I let other people bleed in because they can see it's free, and they'll go hijack us. So you are certainly not the first person to say block that time, to actually have that time where you know that you've got a task to achieve. And I'm going to have to start it. Hopefully this will be the last podcast episode where I ask that same question and go, yeah, I've still not done it.
And if you want some additional reading on that, look up Cole Newport.
Cole Newport.
So he's a computer science professor, but he has wrote books like Deep Work, So Great They Can't Ignore You, Digital Minimalism, some other items that are all good, but one of his concepts is time blocking. So go do some research on that, and you can walk through kind of how he structures the day. Sort of, as you say, like I used to work, it's like, oh, I got a long laundry list, let me just pick something, and then I kind of get to the end of the day and I think, I probably should have done this item. And now it's either, do I do it now, or does it now get postponed to another day or another week or whatever it might be?
Yeah, that's absolutely the thing. Now, another interesting thing on that one, so we obviously talk about calendars and all the rest of it and going to meetings. Interesting that you say that you look at the ones that you have to attend versus the ones that can be optional. Obviously, we're not massively back to the exact same thing of every meeting was in person, and Teams especially has driven. And I know, yes, you could implement Zoom and all the rest of it alongside that whole concept of remote meetings. The reason I was going to pick on Teams is you get the whole IM interruptions and stuff. And I know we had Skype and stuff before that and various other bits, but it just seems to have taken such a massive ramp up in usage. Do you see much interruption during your working day of random IMs dropping, and especially with just the whole, hi?
Yep.
No other context, just, hi.
Yeah, I mean, as you could imagine, especially as I'm in a big organization, and, we have a large team that works with the customers I have. That's absolutely possible. I think of it in two ways. Like if I'm in other meetings, and it may be distracting, it may not be, depends what's happening. If it's the time that I've blocked out to actually do something that I need to get done, then that comes back to my own system. So I need to make the decision of, if I leave this open, I am leaving myself open to interruption. Like, it's on me if I get interrupted or not. It's not on the other person if I get interrupted. Yes, ideally they would send hello and the ask that they want, and it would be easier. But it's still up to me to take the distraction and decide what I do with it. It's up to me if I decide to respond or not. It's up to me if I decide to pause and come back in an hour. So if I've truly got to do something, then I have to make the decision of, all right, do I need to move teams away from me right now? Do I need to shut this all down? And there's times where I'm good and bad at that. It depends on how the busy seasons are. But if I truly have to get something done and it's work that if I get distracted, I can't get back to it easily, but then I would just turn the interruptions off. And then when I get back online, I'll take some time to respond to whatever might be responded to. But I'm also not shy of, if I'm in something and it's important, to say, I'll come back to you in a couple of hours. Obviously, hopefully with the assumption that you do that. But I'm not shy to say, look, I'm actually busy right now. I'm presenting, or I'm in a meeting, or I'm preparing for something. I will come back to you and just let them know. At least they've been heard and I can move on.
Yeah, it's interesting that whole bit, because when you started to say about you can just get rid of Teams and close it down, but then you did say depending on how good or bad you are with that. Right. So I'm forever kicking myself for not closing Teams, even if I put it on DND, try to use Focus Assist and stuff, and trying to get into that habit of actually closing it, because I'm too helpful for my own good. If I do see an IM, I'm not rigorous enough with my systems not to either quickly reply or do something about it. So how often realistically do you find yourself closing Teams fully versus trying to ignore any pop-ups or accidentally clicking on it to send somebody else a message and seeing something else that you get dragged into?
I would say the mornings, I rarely ever succeed. That's generally the hive time. Everyone's in, sending stuff, it's happening. I should probably be there to be. But as it gets later in the day, it's probably when I can be more successful. But I guess the other thing that I did too, because I knew that I'm like you, right? I mean, we're both similar in that my default is to respond and be as helpful as possible, even if it takes me away from what I'm actually doing. Yeah. So the one thing that I've actually been working on, I would say over the last 2 months, so pretty recent, is changing how my notifications work. So, for example, I don't get any Outlook notifications ever on my computer. That is up to me to go pull. It's not push to me, it's pull. Yeah. And in Teams, very similar. I mean, especially in a company like Microsoft, you can imagine how many teams I might be a part of. And there is quite the culture to tag a whole team for a question. So now you just get constant bombardment of like, tag this team, I'm here, I need help. So I've worked quite hard on changing the notifications that I get. So it's only things that I deem will probably be needed my response. It's not perfect, but it has taken away a lot of the noise that I had in previous times. So I don't know, something that I'm working on. I haven't really nailed out the success of it yet, but it's definitely helping me not get as many input feeds as I did before.
It is an interesting one, because that whole background noise of just notifications, things coming through, display alerts, it's an area that I do want to dive into more over time, because I'm on a similar sort of journey of trying to work out what do I actually need visible or audible to prompt me to do something versus what is just distracting. Even to the stage where mobile phones and stuff need to be out of the way, because there's little glimpses of light as the screen comes on and stuff. It is that constant pull distraction. And especially if you are deep ingrained in something, it's very hard for me personally, and I think for other people I spoke to take the thought process away even for a second, to come back and go, where was I?
Yeah, it kills productivity or any form of movement. I mean, it's similar. Yeah, mobile. Yeah, I took all the social apps off of that. I did that a long time ago, so I don't have any social media there other than my YouTube stuff. But outside of that, I don't have any social media on there. But yeah, I mean, processing that all very interesting. I mean, I think It's actually another one of Carnupus was a world without email. Well, some things are good in there, some aren't. But he talks a lot about ingest of work and thinking about how you take on work. And yeah, as I think more about it, it's actually pretty interesting because if there was only one way of getting Steve to do work, which was like, okay, we're going to go put this in a planner board of some script, and you put it there and you tell Steve what he's got to go do. And then at some point through the day, Steve's going to go bring up his planner board, look through it, and then decide whether or not this is work that should be done or not be done. You had a process for that. Then you lose a lot of that just constant pinging and everything else. So I've been thinking about those on like a team level as well, of like how do we, we're not a tech team per se, so it's not the same as like taking sprints or everything else, but there's still ways that we can improve that everything doesn't have to come through email or Teams. There can be central ways of taking in work and assigning it. So I don't know, I've been putting quite a lot of thought into it myself because it's definitely something that I need to continue improving on. How is my world not driven by email or by Teams or by Slack, whatever it is, right? Whatever the tool is that we're using.
Yeah. Talking about technology and ways of working bits and pieces, what's probably one technology set that you've been talking about recently, or maybe not even talking about, but really infused at because you've seen either it's got something really big and interesting that's incoming that's going to have an impactful meaning on people, or you just generally think this is cool?
It's a good question, and there's probably loads because I think about all sorts of techs. So one thing, what I've been really interested in is how AI services and stuff can help, and how I think about it and what's exciting me is business process. Kind of back to what we were just saying, but just like I remember from I've been in startups with yourself, I've been in my own, and just even when we go look at the large orgs, how there's just so many processes that could be automated to a very high degree of success. So whether that's taking in invoice processing, fully automating, extracting out the key pairs, putting it into a database, pushing it through into whatever ERP you're using, SAP, Microsoft, whatever. I've been putting a lot of time into some of those use cases and thoughts on how do we make the most of this tech to improve people's day jobs so they can focus on other things that are more important.
See, that's the interesting bit for me, because especially when you say AI, for me, the immediate thought kind of jumps to, well, fine, AI, great for doing data processing, being able to take statistics and stuff and give you an answer out the back end of it, maybe do a bit of automation. But as you start to then bring that back around towards that business process side, that's a really interesting area for me, because I come from a background where I love doing the process side around the whole service management and the started levers movers, but more of a technical process management. So taking technology though, and this is where it often gets forgotten about in my sort of circle, where I'm talking about data center management, device management and stuff, is a lot of the stuff that I tend to do is about then enabling the business to then successfully use technology within the business, which comes back to business processes. Because at the end of the day, this is about, for me, how we take some of that technology and start to put it into the working for the productivity side to it, to take it outside of the IT teams into the actual business, to look at then giving. And this is where the bit that I'm trying to get to, you mentioned the whole end game of it is about giving them time back to look at how they do other stuff within that business remit.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think there's so much of a question about that. It's just me kind of trying to take on board what you're just saying and reverbalise it in a way that makes sense for me, which is actually another really good question. So I was asking you earlier around how your sort of learning style and how you do it, and that's that whole reading it back to yourself. I tend to be either that visual learning style or, like yourself there, verbalise it enough so I can hear it and make sense of it.
Yeah.
And so many people have so many different learning styles.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think we just have one either. Like, there is a lot of emphasis on I'm a visual learner or I'm that, but I truly believe that there are different things that we can learn in different modalities. Like some things for me, it's just better to learn visually. Like I just need to see how this actually came together. But sometimes it's easier for me just to actually read it than it is. And, I and there's sometimes there's other ways, maybe it's me talking about it, whatever. But I do think at times there was definitely times where I felt I could only learn from videos or whatever. But I think as I learn and learn more, that I don't always gravitate to just one learning style. I kind of pick where I am in my journey of that learning, and I change based on what I'm trying to do. So I don't know if that will help anyone, but I do feel that at times I got stuck in that idea.
Yeah, well, just to that case in point, I think I've pretty much probably got stuck in that mindset where I like to just visually consume a lot of it. However, the very fact that this is also a podcast is also then open my mind to the fact that actually there are people that are finding this useful because, and I think I talked to Justin Chalfant about this, he likes the whole podcasting side because he has the different modalities of learning, and when he's in the car, etc., you obviously, or you could watch a video while you're driving. It's probably really not recommended or necessarily legal.
We do not agree with that idea.
This is not a recommended thing. But then switching to that different modality of learning for audio is a perfect example where it's a good thing for that scenario where people can then still digest it. And probably myself subconsciously not realising switching to that mode.
Yeah, like I love podcasts. I mean, I have a lot of time where I'm walking or if I'm, doing dishes, whatever it is. But I can listen to podcasts. I could maybe watch a video at a time, but it's harder for me to listen. And this is where I think different topics are useful. Like for me, conceptual ideas, I can really enjoy a podcast and I can listen to how other people are talking about it, and I can internalize it and say it in my own way and put my own thoughts to it. Obviously, if it was a step-by-step tutorial, that might be very difficult to understand in a podcast. But I could also read a document and I could get through it pretty quickly as well. So I agree. I love the podcast forum. It's a good way of taking information, and I listen to a whole host of them. Obviously now, including yours, Steve. I'm in. But
I'm going to blush.
Yeah, I know.
Now, going back to something you mentioned right back at the beginning, and I hope you don't mind me prying too much on this one.
No, go for it.
You obviously mentioned that you came into IT, but not through that whole university route and stuff because you didn't go to that side. So, at any point during that whole career progression side, did you either feel like people were looking at you differently because you didn't go down that route, or you didn't have that traditional sort of, I've got a PhD or master's in X, Y, and Z of computer science? Did that ever ring in the back of your mind that whole either imposter syndrome, or you just didn't expect to get to where you are? Because you've come a long way, a long, long way.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I've been averagely lucky in my career journey that it hasn't held me back from what I know of. I cut my chops early as I started at 17 or whatever as my first IT job. So, where I've always put my money down for myself is that I have a lot of knowledge. Like my knowledge can't be outdone by education. Especially at the beginning years. Like by the time people came out of university, I already had 4 or 5 years of industry experience, which you can't really match that very easily. So I always felt very confident in my own right that I had the skills to go toe to toe. If a company truly required university degrees as the way in, my mentality is that I didn't want to work for them anyway. Like if that was the gateway for me to have the job there and it was truly going to stop me, it probably wasn't the place for me. That's kind of how I always thought about it. Like there will always be a company that is right for me that I think will, relish the skills that I was bringing at that time and help me grow them. So I don't know if it's necessarily made my life harder, but I really enjoyed just getting into doing what I loved early. I wasn't personally, for me, I wasn't at a position in my life where I think university would have been helpful for me at that time. I didn't really have all of my thought plans of how I want to do education and everything at that time. So I think just going into the industry and learning was the best model for me at the time. Not to say I would never go back, but I actually, at the age I am now, I would be a much better university student than I ever would have been back then. So I don't know if that helps at all, but I've always on the point, and I used to do a lot of ambassador work for Microsoft, where I'd go to schools and things and do presentations on what are the options out there if you don't go to university. There's great apprenticeships out there and other things that you can do to get into our industry. And I guess my opinion to everyone is just have a look out what's out there. University isn't the only model, but that's also not to say it's a bad model. For some things,
no,
it might make sense. It can be a great start.
Yeah,
but
that's the thing. It is that two-school thought, isn't it? Is it that school of life and the actual experience,
right?
And you start at the basics and you bring yourself along for that journey, or if it is something that is probably it's not necessary to say that that's the only route in, but something like a data scientist role where you've got to have very heavy understanding of equations and all the rest of it, then maybe that university degree stuff, because you get a lot of the theory and stuff behind it. So there is definitely the two routes, and like you say, neither preclude each other as far as I'm concerned.
No.
But then I personally encountered there's been bits of times where it's kind of like, what do you mean you're not a masters in computer science and stuff?
It's definitely come up.
I don't.
I mean, people are generally surprised when I tell them I didn't go, especially over here. People are like, oh, you didn't go? And it is a shock, but then nothing really comes of it. They're just, I just expected that you went there, and then I will tell my story of what actually happened, which we haven't really gone through in this, but and it's very interesting to most people. And I do think I love these stories to help others see that there are opportunities in. And this is in all sorts of parts of tech. I mean, similar to most people think that they have to be coders and programmers to get in and stuff to get into technology. But there's so many different roles in the tech field, from being consultants to sales to marketing to program management, whatever it is. It's such a wide field of interest that there is no one path in. You can, I think a lot of the best people that I've ever met in this actually didn't start in a technical world. They started in something completely different. So
yeah, I think that's a thing for me as well, especially when you're either first entering into the field or depending on your exposure, or definitely if you're not in the IT field full stop, there's not that understanding so much of just how broad and what breadth there is within the actual IT field. Like you say, there's so many different roles, so many different depths that it goes into, and that whole programming side, you don't have to have come right through and know every single part of a language to even start to get into that type of role. And then there's the varying different roles inside of the whole programming world as well. It's not just about can you type out 10,000 lines of leak code and make something happen. There's all the back end, the front end, the UX designers, lots of different bits on that.
Absolutely. It's an exciting world, technology, for sure.
Oh, yes.
So, Steve, obviously we talked about me not going to university and my path, but I mean, you're obviously had an incredible journey as well. I'd love to hear, as I know you didn't go to university in your path, love to hear more about your journey and how you got to what you're doing right now at PowerON.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that's probably why I asked that question on that side, because like yourself, I didn't go to uni. So I was fortunate enough, unlucky enough, to have kids at a very young age. So I was pretty much straight out of secondary school with A-levels. What's the equivalent of that in the US? Is that end of high school, so just before college? So what is it, 17, 18 with a young family, so there was no way I was going to go and disappear off into uni. But I'd had that interest in computers and done some summer jobs, so I just kind of carried it through, started in local government. So what can sometimes be viewed as, it's like you get either some really amazing people, or there's just that kind of slowness of, fine, I'm here, but they don't often get the support to progress and stuff. Whereas I was kind of yanked out of where I was by an outside company because I was becoming more of a blocker for them to get in and get things done. So I then ended up meeting and working with some amazing people, one of them being Phil Mercer that I work with. And we got to the stage where I'd had enough of doing the same thing over and over and over, and kind of thought there must be better ways to do this. So I went off and set up PowerON to look at enhancing the way that consultancy was done for customers, and went heavy into the automation space with various bits and pieces. And then got Phil coming along and made it into something that we are now, which is a rather large organisation compared to most small MSPs and consultancy companies. And yeah, I've now got the shiny title of Chief Technology Officer, but not necessarily from that traditional sort of route into IT from uni and all the rest of it, more through stubbornness and perseverance and having a passion within IT and boring the legs off anyone that I can talk to about different ways of doing stuff more than anything, I suppose.
I got a question for you, Steve, on as you came into PowerON, obviously at the beginning of that journey, it was very hands-on still on the technology, the delivery side. And as the organization has grown, I'm assuming you've had to take more and more of a leadership role as much as kind of just a technology role in that. One, if that's true, how have you found that transition? And then two, how do you split your learning into that? Because that's a very different learning set to technology to leadership.
Yeah. So there's different types of leadership. So there's that traditional, you have a team, you're doing the whole management side, you're setting goals and perspectives and stuff. And I make no bones about it. I'm not the best on that side of things. I tend to get very sidetracked into both the technology aspects, what can be done. And for me, while yes, they can do the whole leading of the teams and stuff, it's not where my passion lies. So I tend to be a little bit lax on the day-to-day management bits, whereas on that thought leadership of helping people understand, helping the team see a direction where technology can be used, giving them a steering guidance of actually have you thought about this approach rather than that. That for me is the different type of leadership side where I tend to lean more towards. So I'm fortunate now to have less of the day-to-day management responsibilities and much more freedom to both work with customers like yourself on a bit more of that strategical approach of how to use various different systems, as well as then from the internal teams helping them keep up to date with things that are coming through, how they can use it in a different manner, understand the complexities behind it. And that leads back to then me having to consume lots of information and how I learn on top of that to redistribute it. For me, Twitter is an absolutely invaluable source. Yeah. There's so many smart people out there, so many people coming up with content like you do with your videos, the different blogs and stuff out there, that they will have a lot of different perspectives on stuff and a lot of quicker being able to identifying stuff because they're in the backgrounds working with it than me necessarily having to either lab it out myself or play with it coming through or go read the technical documentation. That I can get snippets as they're coming through and then go and pull that into, and I'm going to steal your term here because I'm going to use this over and over now, that just-in-time learning aspects of, right, I have awareness of it, then how do I want to use that? So I'm going to go and pull that bit of information in and use it here and now. So yeah, lots of sources. Obviously Twitter's one feed, that keep obviously eyes on blogs and stuff, but that flow of information coming in, kind of pick out the bits that kind of stick in my mind for think about later, drop stuff obviously into our various different teams. The teams probably get fed up with me just posting random articles at 1 a.m. and stuff like that, but then just pulling them together when needed to understand them better for specific use case scenarios or flows of projects.
I love what you said earlier, though, in the sense of like, yes, you are a leader, but you analyzed and periodized part with the team as well of like, where are you strong in this? And you obviously must have put some systems in place for the day-to-day management in your structure of the tech teams to allow you to focus on where is PowerON going? Like, what is the technology we should be focusing on? What's our roadmap? All that side of it.
I would love to say yes, but no. So thankfully, I have a good team around me. They're absolutely fantastic, that both know where my weaknesses lay and where my strengths lay, and support me across that. So
that's awesome.
They're fantastic enough to bring in a lot of them systems and support structures that I would probably pay less attention to, especially, and I'm getting better at it. I'm getting a lot better at it. That whole shiny object syndrome, I don't tend to generally now just kind of go, oh, that's new and shiny, and go after it. But no, the team around me does absolutely enable. And this is probably a really good thing, is surrounding yourself with them people can make a massive difference. And not realising that I have to do everything. That was a big hurdle blocker for me to get over as well. It's like, fine, this script needs writing. I will write it myself. Right, that needs to be done. That document needs to be processed. So giving up a bit of that control and actually using the teams and the people around me that in themselves are absolutely excellent, that's enabled me to kind of get away from it as they bring in systems and stuff behind me to release me for what I'm good at.
Yeah, it's a skill I've definitely been trying, is delegation. It can be challenging, but
it can be as well, because it's not that I have a controlling personality. Absolutely not. It's more for me the whole, again, that perfectionist side of things, and also, again, not an addictive personality, but it's that feeling of, I've started something, I want to finish it, or that's exciting, I want to be involved. And so neither of them are controlling, neither of them are addictive, but it's still that, I don't know how to describe it, because obviously I'm not a psychologist or anything, but it's that willingness to let go and understand that others can do it, and to do bits where you're better placed. Bad explanation, but it's about the best I can think of for it.
That makes sense. Yeah, you're really trying to, you could do it and you would enjoy doing it and you would enjoy seeing the success of completing it, but knowing that others could also do it as well and unleashing a little bit of that to empower others is important.
Yeah. That's it, empowering others and having the trust in others. That's always an important bit, to understand that, they can do it.
No, I love it. Well, I'm glad we got to talk a bit about you there, Stephen, here through, because you got a very interesting background as well.
Yes, we could probably do another episode just on life stories and backstories. Excellent. I appreciate, Harry, that we've been talking for quite some time, and I am catching you, and you've got a lot of bits and other things to go and get done for the day before we wrap up for the weekend. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we really do need to have a team session with some beers and stuff and just generally catch up properly.
Absolutely.
Either that, or I'm going to come out to Cali and bug you. And
that's it.
Dare I say, do you have an electric car?
I do have an electric car, yes.
Why did I surprise me? Right, I'm coming across and you can give me a ride in your Tesla.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm going to call it as it is. Yeah. You are a through and through now, true Cali, aren't you? You've abandoned your English heritage.
Of driving here, I don't think. It's saves me. I mean, if we want to talk about technology, that is a conversation for another day, because I don't know how much of a good car it is, but the tech in it is very exciting. Second
to none. So, I will stick with my nice little petrol engine that makes lots of exhaust noises for now.
Still a Renault, or?
It is, you know me well.
I know you, Steve.
It's just a nice RS model now, so it goes even faster around corners.
Which is exactly what you needed, yeah.
It will not be, how did Steve die? Oh, did he have a heart attack? Or was he working too hard? No, he just went round a corner far too fast.
Oh. Well, it's been
Excellent.
incredible to be on here, Steve, and I look forward to hearing all the next podcasts and guests coming on, but what a way to spend my Friday. Thank you.
Not a problem, sir, and thank you very much for joining me.
Pleasure.
In the next episode, we'll be diving into security with Daniel Card, better known as Mr. Reboot on Twitter. Look out for it soon. I hope you enjoy, and don't forget to subscribe, turn on your notifications for upcoming episodes, and drop a like or comment.